Why do older generations so often prioritize stability, even when it comes at the cost of fulfillment, while younger generations feel unsettled unless life feels meaningful, aligned, and emotionally sustainable? You notice it in small moments first. A pause after you say you're unhappy at work. A look of relief when you mention security instead of satisfaction. A subtle shift in tone when you talk about purpose instead of pay. Someone says, "At least you have a job." Someone else hears, "Your unhappiness is inconvenient." Someone says, "Just stay and endure." Someone else hears, "There's no room for rest here." No one is raising their voice. No one is trying to hurt anyone. But something feels off. You notice it at weddings, where expectations feel unspoken but heavy. In family group chats, where messages pile up unanswered. In phone calls that end politely but leave a quiet tension behind. Everyone involved cares. Everyone believes they're being reasonable. And yet, something keeps missing each other. Not broken, just misaligned. At the center of this tension is a difference in what feels safe. For many older generations, stability feels like safety. For many younger generations, fulfillment feels like survival. One side hears, "Follow your passion," and thinks risk, recklessness, instability. The other hears, "Be stable," and thinks stagnation, suffocation, slow erosion. One side sees consistency as character. The other sees misalignment as a warning sign. Neither side is confused. Neither side is careless. They are responding to different definitions of danger. And the problem isn't disagreement. It's that each side assumes the other chose this way of being. Most people didn't. They adapted. This difference becomes painful when people stop feeling seen. A parent gives advice meant to protect and hears silence in return. A child tries to explain exhaustion and hears practicality instead of concern. At work, someone stays because leaving feels irresponsible. Another leaves because staying feels like self-betrayal. In relationships, one partner shows love through reliability and provision. The other shows love through conversation and emotional presence. Both feel unappreciated. Both feel misunderstood. And eventually, the tension stops being about values. It becomes about identity. Who I am feels dismissed. What kept me safe feels questioned. That's when conversations harden. To understand this divide, you have to understand the worlds that shaped older generations. In many African contexts and in many post-colonial or economically fragile societies, life was uncertain by default. Jobs were scarce. Systems were unreliable. Political and economic shifts could undo years of effort overnight. Security wasn't assumed, it was protected. In that world, stability wasn't boring, it was a victory. A steady job meant dignity. Consistency meant survival. Endurance wasn't optional, it was virtuous. Risk was not distributed evenly. Failure rippled outward, affecting families, not just individuals. So stability became moral. Responsibility became identity. Fulfillment wasn't rejected because it didn't matter. It was deferred because it wasn't safe to prioritize. Many older generations learned early that belonging required adaptation. You learned what not to say before learning what to say. You learned restraint before expression. You learned observation before articulation. Respect mattered. Hierarchy mattered. Questioning could feel dangerous, not because elders were cruel, but because disruption carried risk. Success wasn't about self-expression. It was about duty fulfilled. Being dependable mattered more than being inspired. Being reliable mattered more than being happy. Over time, endurance didn't just become a strategy, it became a self-image. I am someone who holds things together. Economic pressure taught a simple lesson. If you have something stable, you protect it. You don't interrogate it too deeply. You don't risk it lightly. You don't complain about it publicly. Gratitude wasn't sentimental, it was survival. So when older generations advocate stability, they're not dismissing joy, they're offering protection. What sounds like limitation often comes from care. Many younger generations were shaped under different conditions. Basic needs were more often met, options multiplied, language around mental health and identity became accessible. People began naming what endurance cost them: burnout, depression, emotional numbness. Fulfillment stopped meaning happiness. It started meaning coherence. Does my life make sense to me? Do my actions align with who I am becoming? Can I recognize myself in my own routine? In this context, staying somewhere misaligned felt dangerous, not materially, psychologically. Endurance without meaning began to feel like erosion, so fulfillment became a form of self-preservation. Under fulfillment is a quieter fear, the fear of becoming invisible to yourself, the fear of waking up years later and realizing you adapted so well you disappeared. The fear of living a life that functions but doesn't feel authored. Silence feels unsafe here. Endurance without explanation feels like erasure. This is why just stay can sound threatening instead of reassuring. Not because responsibility is rejected, but because inner collapse has become visible. This is where conversations break down. Stability leads to silence. Silence gets misread as emotional absence. Fulfillment leads to questioning. Questioning gets misread as instability. Endurance gets interpreted as avoidance. Expression gets interpreted as unnecessary struggle. Each side triggers the other's alarm system, and both feel judged for trying to stay safe. In families, this plays out quietly. A parent wonders why their child needs to explain everything. A child wonders why their parent never asks how they feel. Advice is given with love, but received as pressure. Concern is offered, but interpreted as control. Love is present, but it's spoken in different emotional dialects. At work, the divide becomes visible. One person stays because leaving feels irresponsible. Another leaves because staying feels like self-betrayal. One sees loyalty as character. The other sees alignment as wisdom. Both are responding to what once kept them intact. In relationships, the gap feels personal. One partner shows love through provision and predictability. The other through presence and emotional availability. One feels unappreciated. The other feels unseen. Neither is failing. They're operating from different internal maps. Here is the shift that changes the conversation. Older generations didn't choose stability over fulfillment because they didn't care about joy. They chose stability because instability once had consequences they could not afford. Younger generations didn't reject stability because they're ungrateful. They question it because they've seen what unexamined endurance can do to a person's inner life. This isn't a values problem, it's a context problem. Stability and fulfillment are not enemies. Stability without fulfillment becomes quiet despair. Fulfillment without stability becomes constant anxiety. Integration isn't betrayal, it's evolution. You can honor resilience without inheriting rigidity. You can seek fulfillment without dismissing survival wisdom. Some conversations will never fully resolve. Some gaps remain. Understanding doesn't guarantee agreement, but it changes how you listen. It replaces, "Why can't you be like me?" with, "What did you have to survive?" And maybe the invitation isn't to choose a side. Maybe it's to notice where your reactions come from. Which parts of this identity still serve you? And which parts are you now free to reinterpret? That question doesn't need an immediate answer. It's meant to linger. And if it softens the way you listen to someone from another generation, even slightly, then this conversation has already done its work.